This video is about muscles. The human body has over 630 distinct muscles. Muscle tissue is unique because it's able to contract, that is, it's able to shorten. But muscle also has some other characteristics that make it amazing. So we looked at muscle with the ability to contract, that is, to shorten. It pulls on bones. Bones act as levers, bending at a joint, and that's how we get movement. But muscle is also extensible. That means it's able to stretch. So you might remember the old sit and reach. Muscle is elastic. That means it doesn't just contract, it doesn't just stretch, but it can return to its original length, just like an elastic band around a pair of athletic shorts. And muscle is excitable. That is, it can respond to stimuli. So what are some of the main characteristics of muscle and the types of muscle? If you remember back to tissues, you'll remember that there are three major types of muscle tissue: cardiac, skeletal, smooth. You'll notice on these pictures that some of the muscles have stripes or striations. Skeletal muscle, the top picture, has striations. So does cardiac muscle, the second picture. Smooth muscle does not have any striations. Cardiac muscle is involuntary, that is, you can't control it. Whereas skeletal muscle is voluntary, you can control it, but you can't control a smooth muscle either. So these distinct types of muscle have different properties and they do different things around your body. Voluntary muscle is muscle you control. The striations are this overlap between these little bands of protein that make up part of the muscle fibers. The bands of protein are called actin and myosin, and they overlap in places, and that dark band creates the stripe. Muscle cells are often called muscle fibers because they're long and cylinder shaped, like a fiber. These cells have 5 distinct functions. That is movement, we already looked at that it pulls on bone, but also muscle helps to provide stability, for example, posture. Muscle controls body openings, so for example, around your mouth, let's say. Muscle helps to protect the softer, more delicate internal organs. And muscle acts for homeostasis, especially maintaining body temperature. So shivering of skeletal muscle helps to increase your body temperature so that it stays close to normal. Here's some of the anatomy of skeletal muscle. You'll notice that skeletal muscle is a series of bundles, a bundle of a bundle of a bundle. The skeletal muscle itself, divided up into these little fibers. A fascicle is a bundle of those muscle fibers. So one individual package or bundle is called a fascicle. An individual muscle cell is called a fiber. So when you're looking at the bottom picture where it says muscle cell, muscle fiber, that's the same thing. A myofibril is going to be part of the cytoskeleton that makes up the muscle cell. Myofibrils consist of 2 distinct myofilaments. Those are actin and myosin. More about them later. Epimyosin is the outer covering. So that's going to be an epithelial type of tissue that covers. Myosin refers to muscle. So epi is the outer covering. Perimyosin is the covering that's going to divide the muscle tissue into its individual fascicles, the bundles. Whereas endomyosin is going to cover the individual muscle fibers or muscle cells. The whole muscle is covered by something called fascia. So if you've ever heard of plantar fasciitis, that's itis is inflammation of the fascia or covering around that bundle of muscle. You'll notice that the epimyosin, perimyosin, endomyosin, it extends beyond the muscle to form a tendon where that muscle attaches to bone. Here's an example of a muscle fiber or muscle cell. You'll notice that in this muscle cell, we have mitochondria, the energy producer of the cell. We also have sarcolemma. Sarcolemma is a name for the plasma membrane of a muscle cell. So it's specific to muscle cells, the plasma membrane. You can see that it's multinucleated. There's more than one nucleus in a skeletal muscle cell. And you can see that it has sarcoplasmic reticulum, which is like endoplasmic reticulum. In this case, it's going to be releasing calcium that's stored in that sarcoplasmic reticulum. You'll see the cytoplasm. That's the myofibrils that are made up of myofilaments like actin and myosin. So you can see that larger insert shows the actin and myosin. Those are protein bands. The IN lets me know that it's a protein band. And you'll notice that it has this Z line. The Z lines create something called a sarcomere. A sarcomere is the contractile unit of the muscle. That sarcomere is divided up into the Z line, which makes the end. And then you have the H zone and the Z line. And then you have the I band, which is the light colored band, and the A band, which is the dark colored band, where there's all the overlap, making the striations. Here's another example of a muscle cell. You'll notice that it can also be called a muscle fiber. You'll see that the sarcomere is the contractile unit of that muscle. The Z band, from one Z band to the next, is what makes the sarcomere. The myofibril consists of myofilaments, namely actin and myosin. Here's a close-up of a sarcomere, the contractile unit of the muscle. The Z line makes the sarcomere from one side to the next. In this picture, C is the actin, B is the myosin, and you can see how when the muscle contracts, the actin slides past the myosin to overlap even more, causing the whole muscle to shorten. Here's a breakdown of that muscle again. We got the whole muscle divided up into these fibers. It's the paramyosin, endomyosin, epimyosin that's dividing these into these units. The myofibrils consist of myofilaments, namely actin and myosin. The light bands, and the way you can remember the light band of the sarcomere is the I. It's the I band, because I is in light, whereas the A bands are the dark bands, where there's a lot of overlap, because the letter A is in dark, and that might help you remember the difference between light bands as opposed to dark bands. But the question is, what's the process for muscle contraction? So let's take a closer look at what does it take for muscles to contract? How is it that this sarcomere is able to shorten the length of the muscle? How is the sarcomere a contractile unit of the muscle? How does actin slide past the myosin? What are the steps in that process? We'll see that next.